again, everybody. It's another Monday of recording the Flying Pigskin podcast, and we are once again talking about a Bengals loss. It was the first game of the post-Joe Burrow 2020 season. Of course, Joe Burrow went down last week with an injury, and this week it was Brandon Allen starting at quarterback. Again, it was a Bengals loss. I want to welcome in Reggie Wilson and Tanya O'Rourke, our normal cast here joining me on this Flying Pigskin podcast. Reggie, I want to go to you first, and I want to ask you about your thoughts when it comes to Brandon Allen and Joe Burrow this week.
It's weird. I feel like it would be a stretch to call it serviceable. Zach Taylor, after the game, said that he thought that Brandon Allen played good enough. And I think I could keep it at that. I think it's hard going from all of the plays that Joe Burrow made over the last several weeks to that, where, it was just like, Burrow was great at extending plays and, making things, appear out of his hat. And then to go to Brandon Allen, which was very much just, some of those throws he made yesterday, I was just looking at the TV screen like, what are you seeing? Like, I think at one point I tweeted, I can give him my glasses. Maybe he could see the field better, because some of those throws they just weren't there. And, you give a guy less than a week to come up from the practice squad to try to, make something happen. And I get that you probably will get something like that. But that's been kind of the knock on Brandon Allen since he's come out, that he's pretty good at pre-snap judgments, but, reading defenses post-snap, he kind of struggles with, and that kind of showed yesterday.
Yeah, he was 17. You said good enough, and I don't think that anybody expected him or even necessarily was looking for him to go out there and set the world on fire. He was 17 for 29 passing, 136 yards, a touchdown, an interception, and, of course, that late fumble, which was a backbreaker for the Bengals. His touchdown was a late touchdown to T. Higgins that really kept the Bengals in the game, gave them a chance to come back and possibly come back and win the game. They had a chance to maybe get in field goal range late in the game, and that's when Brandon Allen fumbled the football away. And it seems like I've said this a million times this season. It just seemed like another Bengals way to lose the game. Tanya, as you're watching as a fan, and you see that the Bengals have a chance to win this game with a backup quarterback in the game, and then that's how they lose. Got to be frustrating, I assume.
It's just not surprising. I mean, is it?
Sure.
Let's be honest, it's not surprising. And, I gotta say that the whole game I'm watching, and I think everybody was doing the same thing. They're doing other things and watching at the same time, because why would you dedicate 4 hours of your life to this?
Well, I don't mean to cut you off, and let me ask you this. Earlier this season, like the first, 8 games of the season, were you doing other tasks while you watched the game, or were you strictly focused on watching the game? I'm talking about.
I was watching the game. I was watching the game because this was something exciting to watch, regardless of the fact that we might lose. I was watching the future of my team, right? And what struck me the most watching this team yesterday was this poor quarterback had zero shot, right? But how is it, and this is what kind of struck me, how is it that you, me, Reggie, everybody on the planet who pays attention to football knew in their heart of hearts that poor Joe Burrow may not make it through the whole season? How come we all knew that? But somehow or another, the Bengals didn't figure that out, and they didn't plan for what comes next. They didn't have a backup. They didn't have someone ready to go. How come we were everyone but them? They seem flummoxed by this, and we're all like, well, duh, he was going to get hurt. How are we the ones who see this, and those who are supposed to know what they're doing either didn't, or just buried their heads in the sand and said, we're going to work it out no matter what. It's all going to be fine. It's going to be fine. We're going to do just fine. And I thought, that the whole game I'm thinking, this is your answer. This is your answer to a backup quarterback for Joe Burrow. This is what you decided to do. This is a bad organization. And that's because bad organizations do things like that. Good organizations have a plan. They think about what they're going to do next. They think about the what if. Tell me I'm wrong, guys.
Well, I think when you talk about an organization going from bad to good, or a team going from bad to good, which is what the NFL is designed to do. The NFL, it has parity built into it in so many different ways, but the number one way that parity is built into the NFL is through the NFL draft. I think a lot of people would look back and say that the Bengals have had some NFL draft flops. But we were told heading into this year's NFL draft, when the Bengals had the number one pick, Zach Taylor in a press conference, and I'm going to paraphrase, I'm not quoting what he exactly said because I don't want to get it wrong, but he said, "We will never pick in the top 10 again." I don't know if they're going to be trading their pick this year.
Really?
Unless something drastically changes between now and the end of the year. It looks like because if the NFL draft was tomorrow, the Bengals would be picking third.
We may be picking first again by the end of this season. I mean, come on. How in the world do you see us winning another game? Period. How?
Yeah, it doesn't look. I mean, if you look at the Bengals schedule, it doesn't look good. If you're looking for future wins, because maybe coming into this season, you'd say, "Oh, the Dolphins this coming week." I mean, because that's the next game this coming Sunday is a trip down to Miami to play the Dolphins. You would think, "Oh, that's a winnable game." I mean, the Cowboys, maybe that is a winnable game. I don't know. But then you got the Steelers, the Texans, the Ravens. I see probably maybe one winnable game on there, and that's the Cowboys. But realistically, I don't know at this point. The Bengals have 5 games left on the schedule and 2 wins to show for the season up to this point.
Don't forget that tie.
The only reason the Bengals are not the number one pick right now is that the Jets are so dang bad this year. So, and realistically, you look at that Bengals-Cowboys game, which I would say is the most winnable game on the schedule. But at that point in the season, the Cowboys are still playing for a playoff spot. The Bengals are not. The Cowboys have a lot more to play for in that game.
Wouldn't it be funny too that comes back and the Bengals quarterback situation is what it is when he comes back? I feel like that would make him just kind of crack up.
That's a great point. That when the Cowboys come to town on December 13th, a couple weeks from now, it'll likely be Andy Dalton out there leading the Cowboys into Paul Brown Stadium, and the Cowboys will be playing for a playoff spot because, let's be honest, the NFC East teams are going to be playing for playoff spots until week 17. Yeah, that'll be interesting that Andy Dalton will be leading the Cowboys in there as they start to play for a playoff spot. Reggie, what needs to happen for the Bengals? What needs to happen between now? And I'm not talking about in the next week or 2 weeks. I'm talking about in the next year before the start of the 2021 season. Because, I think, honestly, Bengals fans have put a wrap and a bow on the 2020 season because there's not a whole lot more to play for. One of the players was asked after the game, "What are you playing for at this point?" And I think it is mathematically possible for the Bengals to make the playoffs, but it would the chances are like way under 1% at this point, I would think. So put a bow on the 2020 season. Let's look ahead. What do the Bengals do at this point in order to be competitive next season?
Man, the Bengals need a full-out exorcism. They just need to. I don't know. It's crazy because they have some good pieces, some good bones. But man, this team is just not gonna compete like they should or like the fans want them to, as currently constructed. I think, we talked earlier on this podcast about how Zach seems to want to spread things out and pass it all over the field. And they seem to have good enough weapons to do that. And I saw a tweet yesterday that said, Zach Taylor defended the offensive line play the last few weeks, but since Burrow has gone down, the quarterbacks that have taken his spot have taken so many sacks. And the tweet said that the line wasn't necessarily getting better. Burrow was at, figuring out how fast to get the ball out of his hands and all the elusive things that he did to avoid sacks since he was getting hit so much. Offseason priority number one is the offensive line. Like, it has to be. You can't have what happened this year. It's terrible what happened to Joe Burrow, and it still just kind of stings. I feel like a week later, it stings that happened to him.
So let me ask you this: the Bengals address the offensive line in the offseason. They get a top 3-4 pick, and they end up taking a great offensive lineman, probably the guy out of Oregon, Sewell. Are the Bengals suddenly more competitive in the division? Like, is that really Tanya? Is that what's holding the Bengals back right now, or are there deeper concerns with this team outside of we've got to be able to protect Joe Burrow?
Okay, so let's say the obvious. Until this management team changes, the Bengals will not change.
Yep.
And I think it's, I know that that's not something that we can control. The Browns own this team. They own it lock, stock, and barrel. There's nothing that we can do to make them sell the team, I don't think, outside of like people picketing the NFL head offices in New York and saying something has to change. That's never going to change. So while we could sit and talk about what really needs to change, and that's what really needs to change, outside of that, if I were that team, I would start looking at, and maybe this is just me because I'm a fan of AJ Green as a player and a human being, but I'd go give him a chance, get something for him because he's at the tail end of his career. Like, go, you're going to need someone younger anyway. So go ahead and trade AJ Green. If you can give him to somebody who can be a good team, go get yourself an offensive line in the off season, learn. They did it for the first time this year and forever to some degree, and that is to purchase players who are actually pros at this point. Do more of that. Surround Joe Burrow, assuming Joe Burrow is going to be able to come back. And have we heard you're right, by the way, Reggie, it still stings. I still cannot believe. I can, but I can't believe this happened. But is he going to be able to come back in 2021? Are we going to see him on the field in August? I don't know. But if he's going to be able to come back, you better get a team around him ready to play.
Reggie, let me pose this question to you real quick. Let's say we can wave a magic wand and make everybody on the Bengals roster right now healthy, including Joe Burrow. And with that magic wand, we can also redo the 2020 season. All right, but here's the scenario. Everybody's healthy. We're going to redo this season, and everybody on the Bengals roster plays to their potential. Every game. Every player on the Bengals roster right now plays to their potential. How good are the Bengals? So I'm asking you, in short, if the Bengals play to their potential in all three phases of the game at every position, how good are the Bengals? Are they a playoff team and everybody's healthy?
If everybody's healthy and everyone plays to their potential, I think the Bengals are a 6-10, 7-9 team, maybe.
Yikes. And what we're saying is that's the bar. Is that if the Bengals play the best season that they can possibly play with the personnel that's in place right now, Reggie says the Bengals are a 6-10 team, which is not good enough to get the Bengals into the playoffs.
No, there's a talent void there. And, Tanya made a great point about the front office being what it is. Like, there's an organizational problem. And, they have seemed to, it's still really early, but they have seemed to hit on Burrow and T. Higgins and like Logan Wilson, those guys. But look how many draft picks over the years, because this team, to another Tanya's point, they don't like to, sign, big money free agents. They like to build through the draft. But look how many drafts have come and gone and players that, did not work out, linemen, cornerbacks. They haven't been able to find solid linebackers in years. There's a problem with talent on the roster. You got good guys, the DJ Reader signing was good. Like, he's going to be a player for them if he stays healthy. Jesse Bates, is arguably the best safety in football. They hit on him. That's great. Offensively, they missed on John Ross. They hit on T. Higgins. They hit on Burrow. That's great. But with this, along the offensive line, Billy Price, he can't even really see the field. First round pick, missed on him. That was a whiff. Left tackle, right tackle. They've drafted these guys. They've missed on them. You can't keep missing on draft picks if your whole MO as an organization is to build through the draft, or else you're going to continue to go 5-11, 6-10, or worse, 3-13 or something.
Well, to be fair, though, Reggie, some of these guys that you're talking about were not the current coaching staff's guys. Those were draft picks, and you're absolutely right. Your point is absolutely fair. But I guess it starts leaning me towards a question of, what about this coaching staff? They have drafted relatively well. I mean, you look at some of their draft picks, Joe Burrow was just such an easy one. That's a gimme. But,
right.
They've had a fairly successful couple of draft classes. Please correct me if I'm wrong about that. And I just think, at what point do we start looking at the coaching, or how long does it take to filter out the guys from the draft classes that were just absolutely horrible?
Well, and I think the question it brings up is Zach Taylor, Bengals head coach, is he on the hot seat right now? And I don't know, let's say the Bengals lose the rest of their 5 games, finish the season with just 2 wins. What would that be? 2-13-1 this season. Is Zach Taylor then on the hot seat?
I don't think so.
At the end of this season, after 2 seasons with the Bengals, albeit 2 terrible seasons with the Bengals.
I don't think so. I feel like COVID and Burrow's injury kind of gives him a little bit of a mulligan this year. And also this ownership group, not group, but, the Brown family, they seem to have a little bit of a longer leash with, some of these coaches. Marvin got 16 years. I was talking to Keenan about it, and he was like, man, Dave Shula was one of the worst that they've had, and he got 5 years. And it was just like, well, it can't, what I hope is for the Bengals fans' sake and just for the Bengals organization's sake that Zach Taylor kind of figures it out, because I think up until this point, I think he and the defensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo, I think those guys are still pretty green as far as being play callers and really kind of having a feel for the game.
But are you saying the ceiling's high with those guys?
I don't know what the ceiling is with either of those guys, but I guess if I'm a Bengals fan and I'm just hoping for the best, if the Bengals are going to continue to keep that coaching staff in place, I am hoping that they grow and that they learn, continue to learn on the job and figure some things out, because there have been some head scratching play calls. There have been some very vanilla defensive play calls that have just, I was talking to Jim Breach last night on Sports of All Sorts, and he was like, for as long as I can remember, the Bengals have never been able to cover a tight end. Like, if there's a big, strong, athletic, tight end, the Bengals always lose the guy in coverage. Well, that has to change if they want to, try to have some type of success. And Zach has to kind of figure it out with some of his play calling to keep the chains moving, especially on third downs. Like, it's kind of rough. To Tanya's point, like, there is a lot of blame to go for that coaching staff, but I don't think the ownership is ready to give up on Zach Taylor anytime soon. So The hope
No way. They're not going to. He's right. Like, Shula got 5 years. He was horrible. This coaching, this ownership, the Browns and Troy Blackburn, they just let them, let's just see how they do. Let's just see how they do. And you just wait. And you wait as a fan, and you wait, and we're always rebuilding, and we're always looking to the future. And, Zach Taylor, you said this year's a mulligan for him. Well, last year was considered a mulligan too, because, he didn't have a good team around him. And the draft class was too young. And so, I'm not sure that he should be on the hot seat. I'm just saying, when do we stop giving mulligans? When?
Well, I think it's worth noting. This is a different day and age, man. I mean, this is like with social media and everything else. It's a different day and age where I think coaches have a lot shorter leash than they used to. I mean, you just saw the Lions fire Matt Patricia and the GM this past weekend. He's only been there for a couple seasons, for a few seasons, not even 3 seasons. I think coaches have a shorter leash right now, but I think that you'd be naive to say that the Bengals' only issue right now is, if you want to blame the coaching staff, I think you'd be naive to say that that's the only issue that the Bengals are facing right now. But Tanya, I want to ask you, as a fan, if we had a fan meter right now to say, like, what is fan engagement, or what is like the fan excitement level right now?
0.
0. Really?
I don't know. Okay, maybe that's a little harsh. Not very. I mean, I think that most.
Well, I think when you look at, if you're looking at like 2 or 3 weeks ago, it's probably relatively high, right? I mean,
right, it was.
Frustration. And then maybe even a week ago today, the engagement was still super high, right? Because Burrow had just gotten injured. There were fans frustrated saying, some saying, well, it was a freak accident. Most fans saying, we're frustrated because he didn't have an offensive line put around him. The coaching staff and the organization should have known that he didn't have an offensive line around him, and that it was bound to happen at some point. The engagement was still high, but after this past weekend's game, you look at the Bengals leading up to that fourth quarter, didn't have an offensive touchdown until late in the game on Sunday. The only touchdown they had to show was that kickoff return for a touchdown, and then late in the game, they were able to drive down the field when they were down 2 possessions already and get a score. Had a chance to go down and win the game late, fumbled the ball away, and they lose. But after that performance on Sunday, which was all in all not good, does the fan engagement and excitement just fall through the floor? I mean, you said 0, so you're saying yes.
I know 0 felt harsh, but, frankly, I don't think it's wrong. I think that, and, guys, I have defended this team and this organization for a very long time, to myself, to others. Like, oh, come on, guys, this is the Bengals. They're our team. And I honestly feel so betrayed by their lack of what seems to be their lack of care for their player, for their team, and for the fans. They owe, I know that they would probably say, we don't owe you anything. Well, yeah, you do. We pay for that stadium. You owe us at least a good quality program to watch. And it hasn't been that way for a very, very long time. And it's routinely not that way. Under Marvin Lewis, of course, we had a few really good years, but we never even get close to the promised land ever in a generation plus. So, I really do think that when Joe Burrow went down, his knee collapsed, and so did the fan base. I think that it's just so hard to have faith anymore. It's just, you just feel like you're just ramming your head against a wall over and over again. And I still go back to the idea, when you talk about the coaching staff, whether or not they should be on the bubble or not, I still say, why were they not prepared for a backup quarterback? Why did they? That is a coaching error. That is something that they had under their control to make. They had to know that Joe Burrow might miss a snap or two. And it just feels like they pull a guy off the practice squad. The whole thing just screams of minor league. And in a a league that has no minor league. It makes me feel like our team is just the Pits, and it's not the players, and it's, maybe not the coaches. I just feel like I think a lot of fans feel like I do, which is that I just feel ultimately tired and a little bit betrayed.
Well, next up for the Bengals is a matchup with the Dolphins this coming Sunday. That is down in Miami. And you got to think back to 1 year ago, pretty much exactly 1 year ago. These were the two teams in the pit of the NFL. We had a pretty good idea that one of these two teams, the Bengals or the Dolphins, was going to have the number one draft pick. It ended up being the Bengals, but man, that was kind of like the Burrow Bowl at the time. But it's amazing to look and see what the Dolphins have done since then. The Dolphins, heading into this weekend, are an 11.5-point favorite over the Bengals. Now, what that tells you is Vegas really strongly thinks that the Dolphins are going to win this game against the Bengals. And I mean, granted, I get it. The Bengals are without Joe Burrow, but it is wild to see how the Dolphins have looked good. I mean, they haven't beaten a ton of great teams this season, but they have looked good for a lot of this season. So credit the Dolphins for sort of turning things around. That's who the Bengals are up against this coming Sunday. Tanya O'Rourke and Reggie Wilson, thank you all for joining me as always. We'll do it again next week, and we'll break down that Bengals against Dolphins game. Until then, Hoo Day.